This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
13 Daggers Tattoo Studio is looking for a new tattoo artist. Must be established with a strong portfolio and good work ethic. Stop by today at 13 Daggers across from Patriot Park on Fort Campbell Boulevard. Clarksville's ultimate tattoo studio. Tattoos, touch-ups, and consultations. See the artist's work online at 13daggerstattoo.com and get the custom experience you want with killer ink. Book today and get pricked by a pro. 13 Daggers Tattoo Studio. Looking hard on the boulevard.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of College Football Monday. Actually, a college football playoff edition. Be our last show of the year. I cannot believe, Zach Mckinnell, that the end of the year is already here and bowl season is about to begin.
Yeah, this season went by so fast, man. It feels like it went by in a blink of an eye. And I mean, it's been a great year. College football conference championship weekend gave us a lot of great games, and I think a lot of people are happy. I feel like as long as you don't reside in potentially Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I think everyone in the world thinks the College Football Playoff Committee finally got it 100% right.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments, but before we do that, I want to get to breaking news. Most of you that are college football fans have probably heard this already, but we want to go ahead and the finalists for the Heisman Trophy, and I'm sure we'll have a little flack on this one, has been announced. And you can see it scrolling on the bottom of your screen now. But the four finalists: Stetson Bennett from Georgia, Max Duggan of TCU, C.J. Stroud, Ohio State, Caleb Williams, USC. And I'll tell you what, I do have a problem with this. And let me first start out by this. I'm going to give you my take, Zach, and then I'd love to hear your take. I don't like how it's just a quarterback award this year. I think there should have been other people. I mean, it's the Heisman Trophy. It doesn't say it's the Quarterback of the Year award. And I really don't like that. Number two, I agree with three of the four. I believe Caleb Williams should have been there. I think he'll actually win it. That's my belief. C.J. Stroud had a great year. He had, 37 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, over 3,300 yards. Max Duggan, you and I have been talking about, and we'll talk about him a lot more later in the show when our special guests come on, Jamie Plunkett. And then there's Stetson Bennett of Georgia. I don't agree with Stetson Bennett. First of all, I think Stetson Bennett, in my own opinion, first of all, before we get to other quarterbacks who are deserving of it, I think Blake Corum should have been in that spot for Michigan, but I think the knee injury towards the end of the year, it had to hurt him because the guy had over 1,400 yards and went off, 18 touchdowns, and I know you'll hit on that in a minute, but when you look at the quarterback position even, and I mean, Stetson Bennett, the only reason he's up there is because of his team. That statistically, he hasn't done anything to make the team lose, but he hasn't been the best quarterback by far in the nation. I can think of a couple. The one guy I liked that I knew wasn't going to make it, but I liked was that Penix guy out of Washington. I thought had an incredible, and you talked about him a lot this year, had an incredible season. Hooker of Tennessee had a tremendous year. You know who people forget? Will Rogers.
Yeah.
I mean, had a terrific year. And then, of course, your old friend Bo Nix. And let's not, from not Auburn, Oregon. I almost slipped there. And then even Drake May had over 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns. Talk about the Heisman. You just heard what I thought and some players that I thought. Talk about only quarterbacks and talk about if you think they got it right or if you maybe agree with me that somebody else, maybe it wasn't Blake Corum for you, but from another position, a wide receiver, defensive, which we don't see a lot of defensive people in this award, which is a shame. But tell me what your thoughts are.
I don't mind 3 of them. I mean, I think Caleb Williams, Dugan, CJ Stroud. I think all those guys deserve it, especially Dugan, man, coming in first year head, first year head coach is Sonny Dykes coming into TCU. He leads the team to a regular season Big 12 title. They ultimately lose to the championship game, but he leads them to the playoffs. He's been electric all year, a real dual threat guy. Caleb Williams, I think I told you the last show we had, I thought he was my favorite to win it right now. 37 touchdowns, over 4,000 yards passing, 10 rushing, almost 400 yards on the ground. And well, I'm sure we're going to talk about it. I think the injury really held him back on Friday night in the Pac-12 championship against Utah from really using his full range. I think anyone who watched that game could tell you he was not 100%.
No doubt about it.
Midway through that game, and it really affected USC's offense. With CJ Stroud, he's had an excellent year too. Leads Ohio State to another playoff run. They don't get the Big Ten title, but I thought he was set probably one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the country all year long. Now, they gave it to Stetson Bennett because of his team success, and they're saying he's the best quarterback. He's the quarterback of the best team in the country right now. But if you're going to give it from a player to Georgia, I think you got to give it to someone who statistically deserved it. I mean, if you're going to put Corum in there, I mean, or put Bennett in there, I just don't see how you don't include maybe the tight end, Brock Bowers. You put in one of the top defensive players. You put in someone else, but I think Corum should have been there. I think without his injury against Ohio State, he would have been by far statistically one of the best running backs in the country. And, it's been a quarterback award for a while, so it doesn't surprise me that they put 4 quarterbacks in here. Let's just be honest. It's going to take a historical effort to win it, especially even as a running back right now. And so I think Corum had a chance, but the fact that he didn't get to have his Heisman moment against Ohio State really set him back. But I think 3 were right. I don't really agree with Stetson Bennett. But I think Caleb Williams right now is the pretty odds-on favorite, so it might not really mean much about who else is there.
Now, let's go ahead. We're going to skip from Heisman now, and I want to go over to, as I'm putting up some information here, I think the College Football Committee got it right this year. Year after year after year, balk about them not getting it right. Even when TCU lost this weekend, I said to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter. They're still one of the top 4 teams and deserves to get in. But I want to ask you a question. And for those of you fans, I'm sure everybody knows it right now. It was Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, TCU stayed at number 3, which we can discuss that because I laugh at that because I think that was done purposely. And then Ohio State came in. USC with that loss, second loss to Utah this year, falls out. And I know they got it right, but I have to ask you this question. Is it fair to penalize a team for being in a championship game like USC was in and another team that didn't even win their conference gets in because that team, the other team is playing an extra game that the other team doesn't have to play?
Yes and no. I think the distinguishing factor here is that Ohio State had to end up playing number 2 Michigan, and and USC had 2 chances to beat Utah this year. They failed to do it either time. And so you have a one-loss team with their only loss being to the number 2 team in the country, and a team who has 2 losses to Utah, who's a 3-loss team right now. I think that's the distinguishing factor. If they go to because I even think if Georgia loses to conference championship game, they're probably still in.
Sure.
It's
If Michigan would have lost, they would have stayed in.
It's the fact that USC lost to Utah twice.
Yeah,
And they did it the
thinking
first time healthy too. Caleb Williams was fully healthy the first loss, and they just choked.
Yep.
And they got to be
penalized. They had the same issues in the second game that they did the first game, except for the fact, but their defense, came to play. Williams was sacked so many times. I can't even tell you how many. I think it was 7 or something. But at the end of the day, definitely a game there. We're going to have in a couple of minutes Jamie Plunkett, who covers the TCU team. He's going to be on with us. So we're looking forward to that. I want to get to before we go back to the playoffs, I want to go back to a couple of topics. First of all, I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm not going to go over every team that has had a coaching change, or you and I could be on here all day long. But I'm going to tell you, Auburn did not hire the sexy pick here, in my belief, when they hired Hugh Freeze. You're a big Auburn fan. What is your thought on that hire? Were you okay with it? Were you disappointed in it?
I was okay with it. I personally was perfectly fine with it and I think nobody could have a real critique in terms of on the field performance for Hugh Freeze. You can't take a look at his history and say it was a bad hire because he's won everywhere he's been. Right. He's won at Liberty. He's won at Ole Miss. He won he won the conference championship his 1 year at Arkansas State. He won at I forgot where he coached before that. I think it was at the D2 or D3 level or something like that. He won there. I think a lot of the pushback came from off the field things that there's still, I think, a lot of misconceptions about what happened because there's still a lot of articles being written about stuff that isn't historically accurate. And so everyone deserves a second chance, in my opinion. He didn't have a scandal that I think you look at the Art Briles, the Joe Paternos, things like that, where it's like, okay, I get why those guys didn't get another chance. But he was paying players, which is legal now. And, he made some questionable decisions off the field in terms of an escort service, but I don't think that's a offense that should keep a guy out of a job for the rest of his career. And he paid it. He paid his debt. He took a long fall. I mean, let's be honest. Did anyone know where Liberty was before Hugh Freeze turned that program into having Malik Willis? He went from coaching in the SEC, beating Saban back-to-back years, to fall into Liberty. He paid his debt for his mistake, and he earned his way back to the SEC. Now, I actually thought it was a sexier pick than hiring Lane Kiffin. That I might be in the minority of Auburn fans and experts who think that, but here's how I look at it.
Well, and before you get into that, I can understand that because I know you well enough. And in my opinion, just to interject a minute, I agree on that part. I was never a big fan of Kiffin being hired if Auburn was going to hire him. And the only one reason, unless I'm wrong and correct me, I know you will, he hasn't won anywhere.
I agree. He won one time at USC, and then the program fell apart. He was fired 2 years later. Like my thing is, Auburn set the standard when they fired Gus Malzahn. We're not okay with 8 to 9 wins and beating Bama occasionally and getting to an SEC championship every 5 years. We're not okay with that. What were you going to get with Kiffin? That's any different. Like, and the excuse I keep hearing from Auburn people is, well, he was at Ole Miss. Well, there's a more prestigious job he's been at, and he couldn't do it consistently, and that was USC when the Pac-12 was not very good at that time, and he choked consistently. And here's the distinction, and you could say Hugh Freeze hasn't necessarily won an SEC championship, and he hasn't. He was also at Ole Miss, but we don't have any data to suggest what he would do at a bigger program like we do with Lane Kiffin. And also, Lane Kiffin was going to cost Auburn $10 to $12 million per year. They got Hugh Freeze at about $5 or $6 million. That's a huge difference in terms of expectations of what you want from a coach. I think Auburn gets an A+ for the hire. You can question his off the field antics, but like I always say, man, it's not. I would advise people not to throw stones living in a glass house because there's a lot of people who I see throwing criticisms out there who, if their personal life was put out there and every mistake they have blasted over ESPN, they probably wouldn't be sitting as pretty.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's stay on coaching for one more. I want to get your opinion on it because I got a real bad taste in my mouth on this one. I thought Deion, forget it, making the right choice, okay. But I know by now, of all people, you heard his incoming his incoming meeting to the players, at least what he wanted you to hear. Let's put it out like that. What was your thoughts about him going in and telling these players, go to the transfer portal? He basically told these guys he don't want them. He's going to bring his own people in, and they're going to win with their own players. Did that give you a bad taste in your mouth?
No, I mean, not necessarily. I think, and I do think he did say some of you guys who don't want to compete just need to go ahead and enter the transfer portal. That's true. I mean, listen, he's coming into a program.
I agree with that.
He's coming into a program that was 1-11, had the worst points per game differential in the country, and statistically the worst defense in the entire country. And they went 1-11. Like, man, I'm sorry. Half of that team is not good enough to play in the Pac-12. And I think he knew it, and he's always been kind of an upfront guy. I didn't have a problem with that. I think there were some other things about how his exit that rubbed people the wrong way. Like, I was at the SWAC championship on Saturday night when Jackson State beat Southern. He skipped his press conference post game, so he went to conference championship, doesn't address the media, goes straight from the stadium, tells his team he's leaving, and he's wheels up in about an hour and a half after the game to Boulder. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And then he took a shot at Jackson in his press conference that was kind of unnecessary about the crime rate. I mean, when's the last time that you heard in a press conference a coach take a shot about crime rates in the city in his opening press conference about his previous stop, where, by the way, all his kids are enrolled there still, and they got to go back and coach the Celebration Bowl that's coming up next weekend. It was just like, man, he kept burning all these bridges left and right, and it just seemed like nothing was handled appropriately. And the bigger thing is, he opened up his goodbye message to his team by saying, I wanted you guys to be the first to know. When, man, I knew for 48 hours he was gone. Pete Thamel broke the report over 24 hours before he said that, so you're lying. We're not the first to know, but I didn't have a problem with him saying, listen, we know what Shador is at quarterback, and he's going to bring a 5-star Travis Hunter. And as crappy as it may be for some of those kids who have to transfer, at the end of the day, I say this all the time, coaches get paid for wins and losses. It's a business. And if a kid I'm bringing in is better than you either compete and get better, or you got to hit the road, man, because a feel-good story can't cost me my job.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. But a feel-good story that doesn't make me feel good, I'm going to tell you right now, and you and I have had this debate many times about the transfer portal here on the transfer portal we'll talk about later on, about players opting out of bowl games. And, okay, I can understand, Zach, and hear me out, if your team is not in the playoffs and you have nothing to lose, nothing to gain, let's say, from a team perspective, and you don't play because you don't want to get injured, even though I don't agree with it, that, but I can understand it more. But here you got a guy in Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State, one of their star receivers, who's opting out of the bowl game versus Georgia. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't like it. I don't agree with it. And it's sickening and nauseating to me to see this be allowed in college football. Because you know why? You get paid to play at Ohio State. You get a scholarship to play there. They don't ask you when you opt out of a bowl game that is going to be for the national championship to give back your scholarship since you're not playing. You owe it to the university to win that national championship, or at least go out trying to win that national championship. Nobody can convince me that this kid is doing the right thing when his team, it's different last year when we talked about this and the kids weren't going for a national championship. What's your take on this kid going for a national championship? I'm making sure everybody understands me. They are in the playoffs, Ohio State. They are playing
Georgia,
excuse me. On December 31st, they're playing Georgia. What's your opinion?
Usually I'm on your side, and I've been vocal on the show that I'm usually on your side with this. I hate players opting out, but this is a little bit different. I don't know if you know this. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been hurt all year. He pulled his hamstring and hasn't played since the middle of October, and he was still doubtful for this game. He was just saying he's not going to try to risk his hamstring being any worse by trying to play in this game, and that he was just going to call himself out for the season. That's pretty much what happened. He's like, man, I'm already hurt. I don't want to, and you already know how hamstrings are. All it takes is for you to go out there a week too soon and you tear it, and then you're out for indefinitely. And he already has the combine coming up. I'm usually with you, but because he has an injury that has kept him out for over 2 months, and he's only played in 3 games this year due to that injury. He hurt it on the 17th against Toledo, came back against Iowa, re-aggravated it. And what he was saying is he's not going to come back and try to re-aggravate it again. He's going to make sure he gets healthy for the draft. So in this very, very rare injury case, I do agree with him opting out here.
Okay, fair enough. Well, listen, one team who didn't opt out, and I am so glad, and you and I have been big, big fans of them the entire season. We've been pushing for them. We wouldn't sit here and say before the year began that we were, huge fans of TCU. But throughout the year, we've been watching them closely. And more as the weeks went by, we became more and more surprised at how good this team really is. And it's a great honor, thrill, and pleasure to now introduce to you. He covers TCU. He is a reporter for them. He covers all of the athletics for TCU at Frogs Today, it's called. You can see that on Twitter. I'm bringing up some information as I talk, getting his name in there. Let's go ahead and welcome in Jamie Plunkett. Jamie, how you doing, buddy?
Guys, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Thanks for coming on. Jamie, I got to ask you, okay? And I know you'll give me an honest answer, my friend, but you had a tough loss versus Kansas State, who, please, as the fans listen, is one heck of a team. They've been a good team all year long. They're a top 10 team, as we all know. So it wasn't like you were playing nobody, but was there ever any doubt in your mind after that loss that the committee might not vote in favor of TCU?
I think every TCU person on the planet has a little bit of PTSD still from 2014, getting dropped from 3 to 6 after a 55-3 win and being excluded from the college football playoffs. So yeah, there was a little bit of concern there, but realistically, when you look at TCU's resume this year compared to some of the other teams that were in that conversation, they went 12-0 in the regular season and made their conference championship game. They already have a win over Kansas State this year as well. So there really wasn't much for them to lose. Now, had USC gone out and beaten Utah, maybe we're having a different conversation right now. But USC's loss, coupled with the fact that TCU had already beaten Kansas State once this year, I think really secured their spot. So I felt relatively confident going into Sunday morning that TCU was going to be in. But as a Frog fan, you always kind of have this little bit of concern in the back of your head that you're going to get screwed over.
Talk about Max Duggan and his overall impressive year that he has had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Max. As you see, I see on the scroll down there on the bottom of the screen. He's one of the 4 Heisman finalists this year. I think he's incredibly deserving of that. He's one of 2 quarterbacks in the country that has more than 3,300 passing yards, at least 30 passing touchdowns, and 4 or fewer passing interceptions this year. So just an incredible year from him. He's also one of the only quarterbacks in the country with that many passing yards and over 400 rushing yards in the country as well. If you guys watched the Big 12 championship, you saw that final regulation touchdown drive where he ran 95 yards on that drive alone, including a 40-yard run followed by an 8-yard touchdown run, bleeding, absolutely gassed. That's just who he is. Every time we've had a chance to talk to Max this year, he immediately redirects the conversation to his offensive line, to his teammates, to his coaching staff. He's an incredibly humble kid, an incredibly hard worker. And folks probably don't remember, he actually, after being a 3-year starter at TCU, lost the starting job in fall camp this year to Chandler Morris. Morris goes down with an injury against Colorado in week 1, and Max takes the job and never looks back. It's been a really fun story to watch it develop over the course of this season.
Yeah, it's funny how that happens, and we see that happen a lot in not just college football, but in professional football as well. Now it's time to play Michigan, okay? Now we can call it the biggest game of the year for TCU. Mm-hmm. How do you think they match up against them?
You know, I feel a little bit better about it without Blake Corum in that lineup for Michigan. You know, a guy who I believe should have been another Heisman finalist despite going down with an injury a couple of weeks ago. I saw someone say on Twitter earlier today, and I think I agreed with them, that we should take away the voting rights of everybody who just votes for the quarterback of the number one football team in the country. Because I love Stetson Bennett. I think he's a really great story, but I don't think he should have been in the Final Four. That should have been Blake Corum. So I feel good about TCU's chances. I think they match up relatively well with Michigan. Michigan is a run-heavy team. McClellan has developed a little bit in the passing game over the last couple of weeks, but TCU's run defense is pretty solid. Their secondary is really good. Forced 14 interceptions so far this year. And then offensively, TCU's gotten like the number one or number two scoring offense in the country, which I'm really excited to see match up against that excellent Michigan defense.
And, everybody talks about Dugan, and they talk about Michigan's running game. And believe me, I know Corum's still out, but I'll tell you what, Donovan Edwards is one heck of a back as well that you're going to have to stop. But when you look at TCU, they have a pretty good running back themselves in Kendre Miller, don't they?
They do. Kendre's been a really good revelation for the Frogs this year. Zach Evans was kind of the lead story back last year for TCU. Obviously, he transferred to Ole Miss this year and ran into another little bit of a running back competition that I don't think he expected over there at the Grove. But, with Kendre being the lead back for TCU this year, we saw sparks of this in 2021. He ran for 150 yards in the second half against Texas Tech last year. He had another 100-yard rushing game against Baylor last year as well. And so we saw a little bit of that spark, but he was splitting time with Zach Evans, and you're not going to not have Zach Evans on the field when you've got him on the roster. And so when that transfer occurred and the new coaching staff came in, they saw what Kendre had, and they said, oh, we think we've got one of the top running backs in the Big 12 here. And he's proven to be just that. He's got 14 consecutive games with a rushing touchdown for TCU, which is one off the program's record behind another pretty popular running back in the day, LaDainian Tomlinson. So if he gets a rushing touchdown against Michigan, he ties LT's rushing record for consecutive touchdowns, consecutive games with the touchdowns, is a pretty cool little milestone he could reach.
I would say, in your opinion, we all know the defense that Michigan has and how good it really, just an unbelievable complete team that the Wolverines have. But let me ask you this. We just talked about Dugan. We just talked about Miller. Talk about how important it is for Miller to have a huge game this verse on December 31st when they play Michigan, to take some of that pressure off of Dugan, who not only can pass the ball but can run the ball as well.
Well, the TCU coaching staff this year has preached balance. They've talked about playing complementary football. They've talked about doing things to get all of their stars engaged and involved in the football game, which means that Max is distributing the ball to a couple different receivers, namely Quentin Johnston, who's probably going to be a first-round draft pick in the NFL draft this spring, but also getting Kendre Miller involved a little bit more frequently than he was last year. So this is an offense run by Garrett Riley, who you might know his brother is the head coach of another a team that was vying for the playoffs, but Lincoln is not the biggest fan favorite here in Fort Worth or up in Norman, Oklahoma right now. But Garrett's done a really good job of getting this offense in a place where Max can distribute and can manage the game. And then when time comes for Max Duggan to be Max Duggan, he's going to go out and he's going to do his thing like we've seen throughout the year.
Go ahead and jump in there, Zach.
Yeah, I know that Chandler Morris transfer block probably still gets talked about a little bit. I don't blame you on that one. But, Sonny Dykes comes in year one. No one expects TCU. Like, if you took a poll, no one's picking TCU to compete for a playoff spot this year. What has been the biggest difference from his philosophy compared to what TCU was used to under Gary Patterson?
I think when you first and foremost, when you lose a guy like Gary Patterson in the way that it happened, where the relationship with the AD just kind of deteriorated, the guys weren't motivated on the field, it was pretty clear that the time had run its course. It's really heartbreaking because, I've known Gary for 12, 13 years, great guy, incredible football coach. Obviously, he's got a statue out in front of the stadium. But when you need to make a change, you need to make a change. And I think the athletic director, Jeremiah Donati, did a brilliant job with his coaching search, finding someone who wasn't just going to come in and be another defensive-minded head coach. Those would have been impossible shoes to fill. And so he found a guy who'd had head coaching experience, Texas ties. Everybody knows about Sonny's Texas ties. and who was an offensive-minded guy. And he was looking for a guy who could identify really good coaching talent and bring in guys who would create a different culture around TCU football. And so from day one, Sonny really did a good job of constructing a coaching staff who were all good coaches in their own right, who were all culture guys. And then he brought in a strength and conditioning staff that has some leading edge methods that really bulked these guys up while they maintained their speed. They're eating a ton more now, which sounds like crazy. You know, you don't think about how much a football player eats and think, oh, they should be eating a lot more. But this coaching staff, they check in every morning at breakfast. They do a weigh-in. They eat in front of the strength and conditioning staff twice a day. And if the strength and conditioning staff doesn't feel like the linemen have eaten enough, they say, go get another plate, right? And so they're really intentional about what these kids are putting in their body, about how they're recovering after a practice or a workout or a game. And that has really transformed and revitalized these guys. And then from a culture perspective too, Sonny really came in and said, you guys are the reason that I'm here. You guys are the reason that TCU football loves, or the TCU fans love TCU football. So we're going to make you the focal point of this program. And so the player first mentality that Sonny takes means that guys are more open to getting NIL opportunities. They're more public facing in the media. We've gotten to talk to tons more players this year than we have in any of the past years under Gary Patterson, which is a huge, awesome shift for us as well. But I think really the biggest thing that he did was he came in, he saw that there was talent on the roster. And in that first month that he was on campus, which was the month of December 2021, he spent his entire Christmas break visiting current players in their homes and getting to know them and getting to know their families. One of the things that he said was, in this day of the transfer portal and NIL, you have to recruit your own players. And so what he really did was intentionally get to know all of the kids that were currently on his roster, which is why there weren't a lot of transfers out of the program. And he knew he had the assistant coaches who could pull together a really good 2022 recruiting class quickly. And so they managed that. They've got a top 18, I believe, recruiting class again this year. And so he's filled the cupboard and he's gotten the most out of these guys. He's gotten them healthy. He's kept them that way. And he's totally shifted the culture.
And you know, the biggest worry too is with how crazy the coaching searches are. We saw it with Lincoln Riley last year in the Big 12. You know, Sonny Dykes hasn't been a top candidate for anyone, but he was mentioned for some of the openings that have been announced. Is that a worry for TCU right now? And what is TCU doing behind the scenes after this huge 12-1 season Sonny Dykes has already had to potentially find a way to keep him long-term at TCU?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And I think it was probably about 3 weeks ago, I got word that they're actually already working on an extension for Sonny. So part of what that is the program has just recently announced a lot of facility upgrades. TCU has some of the best facilities in the country. I'll die on that hill. But Sonny came in, asked for a lot of money from some big donors to improve some things that he had noticed. And they've all ponied up. They've also all ponied up for an extension and a raise already for him and for his staff, which I think is really critical in all of this as well. So, you know, Sonny's got middle school age kids. He doesn't want to bounce around a lot and move them a lot, which is one of the reasons why when you heard his name connected to the Texas Tech job last year, to the Auburn job, even as far as late as last year, you know, those were never realistic things that I think he was willing to do because he doesn't want to move his kids out of DFW right now because of their age. So TCU has the advantage there. They've embraced him. Obviously, he's had an incredible first year, which has bought him a lot of time. He's got a really long runway now because you think about all of these seniors that are going to graduate, and there's potential for a step back next year. But again, he's filled the cupboard. He's done and said everything right, and now he's got them in the college football playoffs. So TCU is going to do everything they can to keep him around long term.
And my last question here, man. What would a win? What would just a win in the semifinals, but ultimately a national championship mean for TCU? His legacy, year one, to go take this team to a national championship. What would that do for just the DFW community and the program overall?
I mean, it would be huge, right? It would be TCU's third national championship in their history, the first one since the late 30s. So, you know, you're talking about almost a 100-year break between national championships at this point. If he could deliver one, that would be absolutely massive. But I think getting TCU into the college football playoff this year, establishing TCU as a power on the recruiting trail in the state of Texas, and really allowing TCU to become the brand in the new Big 12 once Texas and Oklahoma leave. That is a tremendous opportunity that Sonny Dykes has fully taken a hold of. And I think what he's done in just 12 months as the head coach is elevate the brand of TCU further than what we even saw the Rose Bowl year in 2011 or the Peach Bowl year in 2014 when they smacked down Ole Miss. This feels like it's got some staying power. And so I think from a brand perspective, Sonny Dykes has really elevated TCU to a height they haven't seen since the late 30s.
Well, let's ask you this before we let you run. We'll talk about both games. First, let's talk the Fiesta Bowl, which obviously is TCU versus Michigan. Mm-hmm. How do you see this one playing out?
Look, I'm 12-1 in my picks this year. We'll just say that, and I think you can figure out which one I lost. But Michigan opened, I think, as a 9.5 point favorite. I think that's dropped down to around 8.5 at this point. Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked if that dropped to around maybe 7.5, 7 by kickoff in a couple weeks. If I was a TCU fan, I'd take the points right now because I think that's some really good value there. In a perfect world, best case scenario, I think TCU absolutely has a chance to win this football game. You shut down Michigan's running game, make them one-dimensional, and the offense does really what it's been able to do all year, which is score a ton of points quickly. And then TCU has a chance. I think if the Frogs are capable of getting out early on Michigan and getting a lead, the Wolverines haven't really had to play come from behind football at all this year. They've pounded people into the dirt and then just asserted themselves defensively. Will that happen? I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked if TCU upset Michigan here, but also I think my gut is telling me Michigan by probably 4 or 5 points.
But I'll tell you one thing that they're gonna have to do, Jamie, and I know both of you guys, Zach and yourself, will agree. They have to win the third down battle on both sides of the football because the best way to tire out a defense is to keep them on the field. So on the offensive side, they got to execute. And then, of course, on the defensive side, they have to go ahead and get Michigan's offense off of it, contain the run, and I think that will give them the best chance of winning. But let's go ahead and move over to the Peach Bowl. Ohio State versus Georgia. We definitely want to get your opinion on this. I mean, a lot of people are saying that, when you look at a well-balanced team, all these teams are well-balanced. They wouldn't be where they are today if they weren't. But does Ohio State, we know if it comes back to comes down to quarterback play, you definitely got to give Stroud the nod. But at the end of the day, what is your opinion on this game, and how do you see it play out?
I think the only way Georgia loses this game is if they oversleep. I really do. I like CJ Stroud. He's a fine quarterback. He's a system quarterback. He's a game manager. More so even than I would believe Max Duggan. I know I'm a little bit biased because I cover TCU there, but I just don't see a world in which Ohio State beats Georgia if Georgia shows up at all. You can talk about the duds that Georgia's had this year where they let Kent State score a bunch of points. Okay. They messed around and let Mizzou hang about for about 2.5 quarters. Okay. But then they put them to bed pretty easily. When Georgia has faced a big game this year, you've seen their A game every single time. And so I think Kirby Smart is going to have them ready, fired up. They're playing in Georgia, which can't be understated at all. It's going to be like an 85% Georgia fan base there in Atlanta. I think Georgia covers. I think I saw it was like 8 right now, 7.5, somewhere around there. I think Georgia covers that and covers it really easily.
Well, you know what? I'm going to tell you right now. I agree with your assessment. I think Michigan will defeat, unfortunately, TCU, and I do think Georgia will beat Ohio State. But as a fan, I would love to see the exact opposite happen and see TCU play Ohio State. But I think the media, and it's one of the things before I let you run, I really think they kept TCU in that 3rd spot instead of the 4th spot because it could possibly set up a rematch between Ohio State and Michigan, and you know how TV is about that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's possible. I think they wanted to avoid that in the first round, and then kind of kept their fingers crossed
Right.
that it wouldn't happen in the national championship, which I don't think it will. And we saw the outcome of that game already. It wasn't particularly close. Michigan absolutely laid the hammer down in the shoe, which I think says all you need to know about where those two programs are relative to one another right now. And so, it is what it is. I think the committee got it right. I think it was also a pretty easy decision this year, similar to last year with letting Cincinnati in. Like, you have to, right, at that point. And so I think they got it right. I think the matchups are really exciting and fun, and hopefully we won't see big blowouts in the semifinals like we have the last few seasons.
Yep. All right, my friend. Well, on behalf of both me and Zach, we want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to come on our College Football Monday show tonight.
It's my pleasure, guys. Anytime.
All right. Stay safe.
You too.
All righty. That was Jamie Plunkett, who covers TCU. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have all the predictions and our thoughts on the upcoming playoffs before we wrap up the show. We'll be back right after this message.
Father Time is undefeated. It's going to hit Tom Brady eventually, too. It might be this year. Hopefully it's this year.
And Matt LaFleur went to both of them and said, hey, remember that play you drew up on notebook paper on Thursday? Yeah, run it now.
Like, that's the thing that's kind of tripping me up here. We've been clowning Kyrie Irving and his behavior for the past 5 years. I feel like I just got a point, like on a show or something.
3, 2, 1, Kerrsville, you've got state champions coming back home. The East Forsyth Eagles have just won Class 4A state championship.
On the line with NASCAR superstar Bubba Wallace. Bubba, what type of music are you listening to right now? Do you listen to anything particular to get you hyped before a race?
I'm in like the heavy metal stuff, like the screamo stuff, the stuff you can't understand. That's right up my alley.
Tie game at 41. Murph takes the snap. Fade. Right corner of the end zone for Timmons. He bobbled it and then honed it in the right corner of the end zone. Terrell Timmons Jr.
TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com, your home.
You are listening to Frankly Speaking Sports College Football Monday on TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to College Football Monday. And I'll tell you what, now comes the moment of truth. The big games are coming up, New Year's Eve. And Zach, I want to start with the first game as I get my notes together here. 12-1 TCU versus undefeated Michigan. It's hard. I mean, you got great running games on both sides. You got efficient quarterbacking from Michigan. You got great quarterbacking from TCU. But can TCU break through this Michigan defense? And can what Max Duggan has been doing all year, can the magic last for another game?
I wish it could, but man, I have not seen anything this season that makes me think Max Duggan is going to come in here and pick apart Michigan's defense. CJ Stroud couldn't do it, and no one's done it this year. And Purdue hung in a little bit with Michigan, but let's be honest, as soon as Michigan kind of caught their fire in the second half, things got ugly real fast. And I think Michigan's going to be able to force some early 3-and-outs. And with what I've seen from TCU's defense in terms of defending the run, it doesn't look promising. Even with Corum out, you mentioned, man, Donovan Edwards has that explosive next level ability where if there's a hole and there's green grass in front of him, he's taking it to the house every time. And it really, really struggled last weekend with Deuce Vaughn, stopping him from being super efficient, man. They're allowing over 150 yards per game on the ground. They're allowing almost 400 yards per game as a defense. I think McCarthy's going to be able to make some plays down the field to kind of open things up vertically. And I think Michigan wins this game, and I hate to say it. I think they cover. I think Michigan wins this game by 10 to 14 points.
Okay, I want you to finish this sentence for me, okay? If TCU has any chance of winning this game, they have to
hold Michigan under 150 yards rushing, and Max Duggan has to have the game of his life.
Yeah, well, we know one thing I have learned is never doubt that kid, because the kid is amazing. But what a story it would be for TCU. I mean, this would go. I mean, what has it been? It's been like the Chicago Cubs of baseball before they just won the World Series. It's been almost like Jamie said, what has it been, 90 years or over 90 years since TCU has won a national championship in football. That would be a story in itself. Talk about, you mentioned Donovan Edwards. I mean, does it just make you wonder? I mean, look at the two running backs. If Corum was healthy, but he's not, but it's not a bad situation when you look at the negative side of things and say, okay, Blake Corum, who I believe, you believe, Jamie believed, should be a candidate for Heisman Trophy, at least be invited to New York, is injured, and you get to replace him with Donovan Edwards.
It's a luxury, and I think it speaks to how well Jim Harbaugh and that offensive staff have recruited at running back. And man, I think if he can kind of catch his footing, now he's had 2 games as the lead running back. If he's caught his momentum, man, he could be a scary dude. And then also, let's not forget, all season long, Michigan struggled to move the ball down the field through the air. And in that Ohio State game, it seems like they kind of found their rhythm on the play action. And Ronnie Bell and that wide receiving core were able to make some plays down the field. If they're able to unlock that part of their offense on top of what they already have with Donovan Edwards and that offensive line, Michigan becomes an extremely scary team to see these next few weeks.
And I was just you brought up the offensive line, and that's what I want to hit on. How good? I mean, you got 2 runners who are capable of rushing for 1,000 yards if they played a whole season, as the primary back. You've seen McCarthy come up, just come on the last couple of weeks. How good is this offensive line? How would you rate them among the other teams in the playoffs?
I think they're the best offensive line in the playoffs. I do. Georgia's a close second. It could be 1A, 1B, but in terms of size, physicality, execution, ability to execute multiple different run blocking schemes, Michigan's right there, man. The size that they have and the ability to get to the second level and to work downfield is something that is hard to teach. And it's been 2 years now where they've really excelled at recruiting and developing offensive linemen. And I think if you go watch that second half of the Ohio State game, you can say what you want about Donovan Edwards, but I want you to go back and look at those holes.
Incredible.
And offensive tackles on linebackers, on defensive backs, those offensive guards being able to get upfield and work off the double team to the second and third level. It's elite level offensive line play. And as an offensive lineman, a guy who loves offensive line play, it is beautiful to watch. And that's, I think, an unspoken positive for this team that everyone kind of overlooks and gives all the credit to the running backs and the coaching. But man, the offensive line deserves a lot of credit. They may be one of the best offensive lines in the country right now.
And Michigan's averaging 243 yards rushing per game, like you said. But, and I know some of this is Dugan or Duggan, however we pronounce his name. I've been calling him Dugan all year, but I heard Jamie say Duggan, so I think Jamie might know a little bit better than me. But, a lot of that is Duggan, but we talked about Miller. But you know what people don't realize? TCU is averaging 200 yards rushing a game. So they're not a slouch team that, yes, they're going up, probably safe to say maybe the best team that played all year in Michigan. So I'm going to be interested. Hey, you know what? I agree with you. I think Michigan's going to win. I think they may win convincingly, but my heart is rooting for TCU in this game. And I'm not a TCU, I have no ties to TCU. We've been pulling for them all year, and we watched them grow from the unexpected when nothing was going to come out of this to them getting to the playoffs. They're the Cincinnati. Well, Cincinnati was not a Power 5 school, but you know what
it will be next year.
Right.
They're technically a future.
Right. But TCU is a huge surprise. Let's skip to the next game. And, man, as I switch my notes up here and we get to Ohio State versus Georgia in this game. And let me ask you this. I believe this is the Peach Bowl, right?
Yeah.
You know what it is? The Peach Bowl.
Yeah, the Peach Bowl.
Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. That's the game, same night, 8 p.m. You know what? Ohio State and Georgia. I look at this game and, okay, we talked about Stetson Bennett. He does have some big moments at times. You can't deny that, even though we said we don't feel that he should be the a finalist. It doesn't mean he's not a good player. We never said that. But the one thing, and maybe you can trigger my head somehow, but I've watched CJ Stroud play a couple different times this year, even more than that. And I see all the hype. Yes, he's a good player, but there's something about him that doesn't sit with me like I think he's the elite quarterback. Am I missing something here? Or, maybe I just don't, when I look at quarterbacks that I've been impressed with before, I just don't see that it factor. Am I wrong or am I missing something?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of two things. Like, I think he has all the tools that you want in an elite quarterback, but I'll ask you this. I'll do a little test with you. I'm gonna say a quarterback's name, and I just want you to just let me know if there's a defining player moment that comes up with this player. Lamar Jackson.
You're talking about in college, or
Yeah, in college. Yeah, in their college career.
Well, I think Lamar Jackson does.
Yeah, so I'm going to get to a point.
I didn't know if you were talking
like,
in the pros.
no,
I'm sorry.
No. Cam Newton,
Of course.
Deshaun Watson.
That definitely. I remember that.
Bryce Young, even.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. They all have signature moments where you're like, that's where he showed his elite level play. When I say CJ Stroud, is there a game or a moment that comes to your mind? He's never really delivered anything spectacular in the biggest moment. And I think that is what's kind of like the cognitive dissonance of what separates him from some of the elite quarterbacks we've seen. Like when I say Trevor Lawrence, you think of a moment as well. Like all these elite quarterbacks that have been at the top of their game, you have moments that you can associate with them. And also, Joe Burrow. Yeah. And also, he's never won the big game. Lost to Michigan last year. Lost to Michigan this year.
Maybe that's what it is, what you just said.
Yeah.
He never wins the big game. But when you look at this Ohio State team, and I know no one's giving them a prayer in this game, but do they have a better offense than Georgia? And is it just Georgia's defense is so dominant on why people are picking this, maybe not even to be a close game?
I think it's more explosive. It's not better, if that makes sense. It's flashier, so it catches your eye more. But I mean, just compare it statistically. Georgia's putting up 40 points a game. They're putting up 44. They're both putting up 492 yards per game.
Right.
The only difference is I think Georgia's more methodical and they kind of drag it out, and they're kind of more old school where they're going to have the tight ends. They're going to have the Brock Bowers. They're going to have the quarterback that's more of a game manager and is not going to make the mistake to lose the game. They're going to have 5 different running backs that are going to be able to punish you. You kind of have that monotonous style that is just hard to stop. And how
do you protect against, and I'm interrupting you because you're talking about this defense of Georgia. How do they protect against Marvin Harrison Jr.?
They did it against Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman too. They've seen elite receivers this year already, like on the schedule, and they've been able to shut them down. And I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier with our guests, is that yes, Georgia's kind of sleptwalked through the year at times. And I think we've seen that with even Nick Saban Alabama teams when they're at the height of they would always be those 4 or 5 games where Nick Saban, they would sleepwalk, they get to the playoffs, get to the natty, and then they drag people because they're just that good. Kirby Smart's going to have this team locked and ready. And I just think that defense, man, they had 15 players drafted last year. Yes. There's probably another 8 or 9 defensive players over the next 3 years from this defense that are probably going to get drafted too. And it's just unfair.
Aren't both these offensive line really solid offensive lines?
Ohio State, I think, could be taken advantage of. I do.
Okay.
I think you saw Michigan control the line of scrimmage against them, and I think Georgia's defensive line is significantly better than Michigan's this year. And I think that's going to be an issue. I just think what separates Georgia's defensive line from a lot of the defensive lines that Ohio State saw is that Michigan can bring some size, but with Georgia's size and athleticism of some of the guys in the front 4, and even let's go to the front 7, most teams don't have guys as big as Georgia that can move sideline to sideline and do some of the things they can do athletically. That's just a fact. And also, let's not forget Kirby Smart's a great defensive mind. We'll give him that. Probably one of the best defensive minds in college football. And he's got Will Muschamp on his staff too. And there's probably 100 out of the 130 teams that would take him as a DC right now.
Yep.
That schematically they're going to be so sound, so well coached. And one thing you could say, before I toss it back to you, is you can't think of many games where Georgia's defense, outside of that Tua play in overtime, where they give up the big drive killing play that just hurts them downfield. They are consistently disciplined, and they usually don't miss assignments. And I think that's going to cause Ohio State a lot of problems. But I will say this: Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in college football right now.
Oh, no, I don't think there's a question about that. When you look at this game and you're looking at, you look at this game, and I lost my train of thought there because I had something I really wanted to ask you in this game. But you got Ohio State, who, like I said, I'm just not sold on C.J. Stroud. But the one thing that does scare me sometimes is that Marvin Harrison. That's why I asked you that question, is he the guy they got to contain in order for them to go ahead and win this game?
Yeah, 1,000%. He's the guy you got to stop. And I mean, I'll say this too. I don't think he's a guy that you necessarily can stop. He's just a guy you have to contain. You can let him get his 5-6 catches for however many yards, but he can't have the big play over the top that breaks things open. Michigan gave up 7 catches, 120 and a touchdown to him, but he never had the play to end he had that one big touchdown play, and then they kind of contained him the rest of the time. You just contain what he does. Don't let him beat you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and my question, it came back to me. I knew if I asked it that way, I'd get the other question. Michigan defeated Ohio State, a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Do you think at all that loss to Michigan could affect them psychologically versus Georgia?
Possibly, and it could go either way. They could have taken that loss as a wake-up call and made the adjustments, but also you just gave Georgia a lot of great defensive film on how to defend because they really made C.J. Stroud uncomfortable. So it can go one of two ways, but I think the loss more exposed kind of their flaws, and I think that's my concern coming into this game is that I don't think this game is going to be particularly close. I expect Georgia to go out here and make a statement, and we've seen Ohio State come into the playoffs and face some really good defensive teams, aka Clemson, when they got beat 31-0 in that matchup, if I'm not mistaken. I don't see it being that bad, but I think Georgia wins this game by 14-21, and they pull away late. I think it's similar to the Michigan game where it could be close early. Georgia's going to make their adjustments, and Georgia's going to pull away in this one.
Now, let me ask you this. So basically what was predicting is a Michigan-Georgia final, okay, at the end of the day. And I got to ask you this question because one guy that takes a lot of crap at not being a great head coach for some reason, and you and I may disagree that people say this, but I hear it, that people keep knocking Jim Harbaugh of Michigan. Does he need this final, the championship, to maybe get people finally realizing that this guy is a darn good coach?
No, because, I was one of those people. I was on the fire Jim Harbaugh train like 3 years ago because I was over it.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was they brought him there as a quarterback developer, and he ain't developed a damn quarterback since he's been there.
Right.
That was the big issue. And then also you get paid to beat Ohio State too. And he consistently couldn't do that. And so I'm off of his case now. He's beat Ohio State twice, back-to-back years, and on the road without his best player found a way to pull out.
But how about the media? I mean, you and I can talk here and say we all right, we're now okay with him. But from a media perspective, does he need that championship for people to just say?
I don't think so. I think if he wins the first round and is competitive with Georgia and ultimately loses, everything will be okay. Like, bro, everyone knows this Georgia team is legit. Like, that's a really good Georgia team. And Kirby Smart is rolling. He's creating a Nick Saban-esque dynasty over there in Athens. The one thing I don't think he can do is, one, get upset by TCU, especially in a blowout. Right. And if he wins, goes to the national championship and gets handled like he did last year. He at least has to show some improvement. And as long as he keeps winning Big Ten titles, man, he might get that narrative of he can't win the national championship. But I think Michigan might just be a few pieces away from getting that national championship. I don't know if they're better than Georgia right now, but I think they're on that path.
All right, 15 seconds or less. We're running out of time. Who wins the national championship?
Georgia Bulldogs. That's been my prediction since August, and I'm going to stick with it.
It certainly has. I'm your witness on that. All right, my friend. Well, another great show in the books. This was our championship prediction show. It's been fun. We want to thank Jamie Plunkett from TCU taking his time out of his schedule to definitely come on. That was a great interview with him. And I guess once again, we'll see about next year where we do it all over again. Time doesn't take long. It seems to go by quick. But until next year, we'll talk to you later.